26th at Yellow Springs.
I recall it very well.
Yeah.
Oh, my. It has been so many years since I last heard that music. Why, it brings back a flood of memories for me. Why, it seems like only yesterday when my dear Franklin and I first entered the White House as the President and First Lady. But oh, so many years have passed. So many things have happened. Why, when I was growing up, I never imagined that one day I would be the wife of the President of the United States. I was a very serious and solemn little gal. I was so serious, my mother nicknamed me Granny. A nickname I detest to this day. I think, perhaps, my mother was the most beautiful woman I have ever seen. Anna Livingston Hall, always the belle of the ball. I knew from a very early age that I was a great disappointment to my mother. She once told me that since I did not have good looks, that I should always have the best of manners and always try to be my very best. I have indeed tried to be my very best. You see, my parents were very young when they were married. My mother was just 19, and I followed soon after the wedding. I was born on a sunny Saturday morning, October 11th, 1884, in Long Island, New York. I was born into the golden affluence of the Roosevelt family, one of the oldest and wealthiest families in New York. My father was Eleanor Roosevelt, the younger brother of President Theodore Roosevelt, my Uncle Teddy, and my godfather. As I say, my parents were very young when they were married. I don't think either were really prepared for the challenges of raising a child. My poor mama suffered terribly from bouts of migraine headaches and depression. She would often take to her bed for weeks at a time. There have been times when I thought it was my father's behavior that brought on my mother's illnesses. He was either in the throes of alcohol or in the arms of another woman. Oh, but nonetheless, I adored him, and I miss him to this day. Sadly, those illnesses would take a toll upon my mother. She died when she was just 29 years old. She left behind myself and my two younger brothers, Hall and Elliot. Poor little Elliot would follow Mama in only a few months. Our poor father was grief-stricken. You see, we rarely saw him. The family did not feel that our father was capable or responsible enough to look after us. And so my brother and I were shuttled amongst the relatives, aunts, uncles, cousins, but we spent most of our time with our grandmother Hall, at her house at Tivoli, New York. I have always felt as though I really never had a place that I could call home, some place where I belonged. Sadly, my father's behavior, too, took a toll upon him. He died when he was just 34 years old. He died at the home of one of his lovers. When I was told of my father's death, all that I could say was, I wish I could have seen him just one more time. As I say, my brother and I were shuttled amongst those relatives. There were times when I never really felt comfortable with Uncle Teddy and Aunt Edith, although Uncle Teddy always told me that I was his favorite niece, and I have never cared for my cousin Alice, for a very good reason. She once referred to me as a withered green bean that had been kept in the basement all winter. And on one visit to Uncle Teddy's house at Sagamore Hill, Uncle Teddy found out that I could not swim. And so he threw me in the lake. I sunk like a rock. Well, he fished me out, and he gave me a very stern sermon on how Roosevelt never shows fear. Well, I began to question my ancestry. Finally, when I was 15 years old, my grandmother Hall decided to send me away to school. I was sent to a small school just outside of London, England, called the Allenswood School. Oh, it was run by a magnificent French woman, Madame Souvestre. Oh, she was so elegant with masses of white hair. I tried to pattern myself after her. I soon became one of her favorites. And on holiday, Madame Souvestre would take me to the continent, and we would go to wonderful art galleries, churches, museums. After my experiences with Madame Souvestre, I would no longer be that serious, silent little girl I had been before. Unfortunately, when I turned 18, I had to leave the Allenswood School. They forced me to graduate. I returned to New York to an endless round of dinners, dances, and teas, all orchestrated to find a husband. For you see, I was the ugly duckling of the family. And this ugly duckling did not grow into a beautiful swan. She just became an ugly duck. And needless to say, not many of the young men were really interested in the ugly duck. But that would all change for me in 1903. I was at a party at my cousin Corinne's house on Park Avenue when I became reacquainted with a distant cousin of mine, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Oh, Franklin and I had known one another for years, but oh, he had changed so much. He was very tall and handsome. He was a college student then. Why, it seemed as though we had everything in common. We both loved reading. We loved poetry. We loved to take long walks together. And soon we would share a love of politics. Oh, I thought I had found my very best friend. I was very surprised to find out that Franklin had other ideas about the ugly duck. He was romantically interested in me. It was during the Thanksgiving holiday, and Franklin invited me to his family's estate at Hyde Park to meet his mother. Oh, I had met Sarah Delano many years before. I was hoping she wouldn't remember me. You see, Franklin was the only son of James and Sarah Roosevelt. James was 52 and Sarah was 26 when Franklin was born. He was her golden prince, and she was not about to share that prince with any other woman. It was after dinner that evening. Franklin and I were able to steal away for a walk, alone together. It was on that walk that my dearest one proposed to me. Oh, I accepted immediately. Franklin explained that he could not give me a ring at that time since he had not spoken to his mother about his wedding plans. And so he gave me this pin, which I have always cherished. Eventually, Franklin would write to Mother Sarah about our wedding plans. Mother Sarah said no. She said we were much too young to know anything about marriage, much less love. But then she finally agreed that if we would keep our engagement a secret for 1 year, she would give her permission. And so in December of 1904, the engagement was announced and the wedding plans were made. The date of March 17th, 1905 was chosen. I did not choose that date. Franklin did not choose that date. Not even Mother Sarah chose that date. It was chosen by the President of the United States, my Uncle Teddy. Apparently, the President would be in New York for the St. Patrick's Day parade. And he would be delighted to give the bride away. We were married at my cousin Corinne's house. Oh, the drawing room was exquisitely decorated with sprigs of lilac and orange blossom. I wore a lovely ivory brocade gown with lace that had belonged to my mother and my grandmother. For once in my life, I really felt beautiful. As I approached my waiting groom, he whispered, "I am the luckiest man in the world." I replied, "I am the luckiest woman." Immediately after the ceremony, Franklin and I found ourselves alone with Mother Sarah. You see, all of the guests had actually come to see the President of the United States and not to attend a wedding. And so as soon as the President left, so did all of the guests. Oh, but Mother Sarah, she had seen to everything. She planned a 3.5-month honeymoon for us to Europe, complete with a chaperone. Oh, Franklin and I visited all of the capitals and all of the tourist spots. Oh, Franklin constantly took photographs of me. I've never really felt very comfortable in front of the camera. But there was one photo. I believe Franklin took that one in Venice. I've always liked that one. While we were on our honeymoon, I wrote to Mother Sarah nearly every day. I told her she was very lucky now. She had 2 children to love her. I wanted her to love me just a little bit. I wanted her to find a small corner of her heart for me. I had once told Franklin that it was our duty to make sure that Mother Sarah was happy. Little did I know what a heavy duty that would be. Oh, the journey home for me was absolutely dreadful. I was seasick the entire time. I spent the entire trip below deck in our cabin. When we arrived back in New York, I found out that I was not seasick. I was pregnant with our first child. Eleanor was born the following spring of 1906. She would be followed by 5 sons. Why, in that first 12 years of my marriage, I felt as though I were preparing to deliver a baby, delivering a baby, or recovering from a baby. Of all my children, I think the most beautiful one was my third child, Franklin the first. He was a very sturdy baby when he was born. He weighed nearly 11 pounds. But sadly, when he was just 7 months old, he passed away. I thought that I would never stop crying. Surprisingly, it was Mother Sarah who came to my aid. She would sit with me for hours on end as I wept. She made bottomless cups of tea. She even spoke to Franklin. She told him that he should be more patient, kind, and gentle with me. Well, eventually, I would recover from that loss. But I have never forgotten that beautiful baby. As our little family grew, so did Franklin's political ambitions. In 1910, Franklin was elected to the New York State Legislature. And so we moved our little family to Albany. Oh, I was so excited. This was the first time in my life that I would have a home of my own. I was so thrilled to be out buying linens, towels, dishes. Oh, I rearranged the furniture constantly. And I became the perfect legislator's wife. I would don my best hat and those white gloves. I knew all the other legislators and their families by name. Whenever possible, I would go to the floor of the legislature to hear Franklin speak. But I knew that was only a stepping stone to something much higher. In 1914, Franklin was appointed as the Undersecretary of the Navy. And so we again moved our little family, this time to Washington. And again, I became the perfect cabinet member's wife. Best hat, white gloves. I knew all the important people, every one of them, in Washington. I knew everyone, and everyone knew me. I became so busy that it was necessary to hire a social secretary. We hired a very well-educated young woman by the name of Lucy Mercer. Oh, Lucy. She was everything I was not. She was extremely beautiful. Portrait painters all over the East Coast clamored to have her as their model. And she was very witty. As the Great War came to an end in 1918, Franklin was sent to France to oversee the closing of a naval installation there. Upon his return trip home, he became dreadfully ill with pneumonia and the influenza. So many of the young men had died from the influenza. Franklin was so ill that he had to be carried off the ship. When he arrived home, I cared for him, night and day. One evening, I was putting away some of Franklin's things when I came across a packet of letters addressed to my husband. I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was that of my social secretary, Lucy Mercer. I hesitated to read those letters, but I did. It became immediately evident to me that the letters were of a very intimate nature. I was so angry with Franklin, I wanted to confront him about those letters. I could not sleep at all that night. The following morning, I asked Franklin bluntly, "Are you in love with Lucy Mercer?" He would not answer me. I raised my voice and I asked him again, "Are you in love with Lucy?" He finally said yes. Yes, he did love her, but he still loved me. I immediately offered him a divorce. Mother Sarah said no. She said there would be no such scandal in the family. Franklin said that a divorce would destroy his political chances. It was then that I decided that I would stay with him. I would continue to be his helpmate, his political advisor, but I would no longer be his wife. From that day on, Franklin and I never spent another night together as husband and wife. In that summer of 1919, I thought the bottom had fallen out of my world. I wrote to a friend of mine about the difficulties with Franklin. I told her that I no longer loved him. I respected him. I admired him, but I no longer loved him. She wrote back, "Eleanor, you're wrong. When you start loving someone, you just don't quit." How right she was. No matter how dark, how difficult those days may have seemed, we would be facing a much greater challenge in the very near future. In the summer of 1921, it was August, we were vacationing at our home at Campobello off the coast of Maine. Oh, whenever we were there, Franklin behaved like one of the children. He would hike and swim and bicycle all day long. It was toward evening. I was sitting on the stairs of the back porch reading when I saw Franklin approaching on a winding path. It appeared that he was having a great deal of difficulty walking. When he finally came to me, he said that his back was aching terribly and that his legs were very heavy. I told him it was probably all of the activity a hot bath, early to bed, he'd be right by morning. That evening, I took a supper tray to him. He said the pain in his legs had grown much worse. By the next morning, he could barely stand. By that evening, he could not stand at all. Eventually, the doctors would diagnose that Franklin had contracted infantile paralysis, polio. And furthermore, that he would never walk again. And so began another battle with Mother Sarah. She wanted Franklin to retire to Hyde Park and collect stamps. I knew that is not what he wanted, and that was what I wanted for him. Franklin would not give up the idea of walking again. He would read everything that he could find on the subject of polio and its treatment. He came across a small town in Georgia called Warm Springs. Apparently, there were mineral bars there, and the victims of polio had almost miraculous results from swimming in that water. And so it was off to Warm Springs. Franklin loved the place. I hated it. But it appeared that he did have relief from swimming in that water. There was a young woman there who had studied nursing and then went to Australia to study with Sister Kenny, learning the treatments and the therapies for those suffering from polio. This young woman's name was Alice Converse. She was from Superior, Wisconsin. Alice designed and built heavy steel braces to aid Franklin in his walking, 10 pounds on each leg. Franklin would don those braces, walk up and down the driveways, perspiration pouring from him. But he would not give up the idea of walking again. And he would not give up the idea of running for office again. During our days in Albany, Franklin and I had become acquainted with a newspaper man by the name of Louis Howe. Louis was quite possibly the dirtiest human being I have ever met. He always smelled of cigars and whiskey, but he had a brilliant political mind, and he adored Franklin. Louis told me that it was my job to keep Franklin's name alive in front of the public. I was terrified of speaking at a public meeting, but Louis would drag me to these meetings. As I spoke in the front of the room, Louis sat in the back and made faces at me. Well, I learned to speak in public, and I kept Franklin's name alive. Franklin was elected as the governor of New York in 1928, but I knew his aspirations lay much higher. In 1929, our nation was plunged into the greatest economic depression it had ever known. Thousands of factories closed. Thousands of Americans were thrown out of work. People lost their homes. Farmers lost their land. Many Americans were starving. The Hoover administration was unable or uncaring. They could not solve those problems. But Franklin thought he had a plan. Franklin was elected to his first term in the presidency in 1932. He immediately went to work on an alphabet soup of plans. There was the NRA, the WPA, the CCC, just to name a few. Some were successful, some were not. When I came into the White House as the First Lady, I knew that I no longer had a personal life. Everything I did, everything I said, everything I wore was open to public scrutiny. I came into the White House as a very reluctant First Lady. I did not want to be the typical First Lady who presides over receptions and pours tea. I wanted a real job in the administration. I offered to sort Franklin's mail, but he said that would hurt the secretary's feelings. But it was Louis Howe who came to my rescue. Louis told the president I could go where he could not. I could be Franklin's eyes, ears, and legs. And so Franklin gave me permission to travel across America. In the days of the Great Depression, I traveled nearly 23,000 miles. I was often accompanied on my journeys by a New York State trooper by the name of Earl Miller. Earl taught me how to drive a car, and Earl taught me how to shoot a gun. And so off we would go with a pistol under the seat next to me. Earl and I traveled thousands of miles together. We had grown very fond of one another. The newspapers began referring to us as Mr. and Mrs. Miller. Oh, that's enough about Earl. As I was saying, during the days of the Great Depression, I traveled nearly 23,000 miles. I walked through the apple orchards of Washington State, into the vineyards of California. I went down into the Dust Bowl that was once Oklahoma. I went into cornfields in the Midwest, lumber camps in the Great North. I went down into coal mines in Kentucky and West Virginia. In Pennsylvania, I met a young woman who had 8 children of her own, but she still found time to organize a milk fund for the poor children of her district. In New York, I met a family who had lost their home. They were living in an abandoned sewer. When I would return to the White House, I would bring all of these things back to Franklin. Sometimes at night I would sit on the bottom of his bed and I would tell him all about the people and the places I had seen. No matter what I did or what I said, it never seemed to surprise Franklin. Franklin liked to joke that I was so rarely at home at the White House that one morning he would open the newspaper and the headline would read, "First Lady spends a night in the White House." It had become our custom, however, that when I was at home at the White House, Franklin and I would have coffee together in the morning just to go over the schedule of events and so on during the day. And one morning, I had to leave very early for a speaking engagement in Baltimore at a women's prison. Nobody bothered to tell Franklin that I was gone. Poor Franklin sat there waiting and waiting for me. He came out into the hallway and asked one of the secretaries, "Where's my missus?" The young lady replied, "Oh, sir, haven't you heard? She's gone to prison." Not even that could shock Franklin. He merely replied, "Oh, no. What did she do now?" Sadly, our nation would not be released from the grips of that Great Depression until the machines of war began to churn. By 1939, Mr. Hitler was making a great deal of noise in Germany. And in Italy, Mr. Mussolini was making even more noise. And in Japan, the greatest military force the world had ever seen was on the march. I knew that America would soon be involved in that war. I shall never forget that night. December 7th, 1941. I was in my office at the White House. I looked out onto a darkened Washington. They were putting up blackout curtains throughout the White House and mounting guns on the roof. I thought about all the young men who would be killed in this war. All those mothers' sons. I thought about my own 4 sons and what it would be like to lose them. I thought, is my freedom worth their dying? Am I worth their dying? As in the days of the Great Depression, I wanted a real job in the war effort. Franklin again gave me permission to travel across America. In the days of that great war, I went down into shops, into airplane factories, where young women were working for the war effort. But that was not enough for me. I wanted to see the real war. Franklin would give me permission to travel overseas. I have walked through the bombed streets of London. I saw the devastated churches, homes, schools. I visited orphanages there. I visited hospitals in Australia and New Guinea. In Australia, I met a young Marine, just 19 years old. His legs had been amputated. He did not want to write home to tell his mother what had happened. He asked if I could please speak with her. I said, no problem. I would be more than happy to. That young man offered me his Purple Heart. I told him, there is no way that I could ever earn such an award. For you see, I am a coward. There were so many wonderful young men and women serving our nation. I could recall hundreds of stories. One in particular comes to mind. I was to visit a hospital on a small island off the coast of Australia. Oh, and the ride across the island was most difficult. I think the driver found every pothole. By the time we were reaching the hospital, I realized I was in very desperate need of a bathroom facility. As I leapt out of the Jeep, I saw all of the doctors and nurses lined up in front of the hospital in their spotless white uniforms. Their white shoes glistened in the tropical sunlight. I saw one very young nurse at the end of the line. I dashed over to her and whispered that I was in very desperate need of a bathroom. The young lady took me by the hand and led me to the nurse's latrine. I used the facility and then went off to visit the hospital. In the meantime, that young nurse picked up a piece of chalk. She returned to the latrine, and on the back of the door of the latrine, she wrote, "Mrs. Roosevelt peed here." Well, before I returned to that Jeep, I visited the latrine, and I saw the young lady's message. And so I picked up the chalk, and underneath I wrote, "Yes, she did, Mrs. Roosevelt." I have often wondered if someone took that door home as a souvenir of the war. Oh, there were so many wonderful stories. Another one comes to mind. Let me see. There was a story going around here. Yes, it was in New Guinea. Apparently, there was a young Marine there who was very unhappy and very depressed. His officer asked, "What's the matter with you?" The young man replied, "Well, sir, I've been here for nearly 3 months, and I haven't shot one enemy soldier yet." Well, his officer said, "I'll tell you what to do. You see that hillside over there? Well, I want you to go over there, and you shout out, 'To hell with Hirohito!' All of the Japanese will jump up, and you can shoot one." Well, the young man did as he was told, but he was still very unhappy. Again, his officer asked, "Did you do as I told you?" The young man replied, "Yes, sir. I went over there, and I shouted out, 'To hell with Hirohito!' And all of the Japanese jumped up, and they shouted back, 'To hell with Mrs. Roosevelt!'" And you see, sir, I'm a Republican, so I couldn't shoot them. Oh, that war. That war would take such a toll on America. But there are times when I thought the greatest toll had been taken on my dearest Franklin. By December of 1944, it was evident to everyone that Franklin was a very sick man. Our granddaughter had come to visit that Christmas from California. She had been in to see the president, and then she came to see me. She said, "Papa does not look well. He's very thin. His clothes don't fit." Franklin had lost nearly 40 pounds. By the spring of 1945, we had convinced the president to take a short vacation to Warm Springs. Whenever he was there, he was re-energized, reinvigorated. On the evening of April 11th, I spoke with him on the telephone. He said he was really feeling much better. His appetite had returned. He thought he'd be up to his old weight in no time. Before we said goodnight, he said to me, "Babs, I have always loved you best." I replied, "You will always be my best boy." That was the last time I ever spoke to him. On the afternoon of April 12th, I was in Washington. It was a women's club meeting, a fundraiser. I received an urgent phone call from the White House. It was Mr. Stephen Early. He was an advisor to the president. He asked that I return to the White House immediately. He did not wish to discuss it on the telephone. Somehow, I knew what had happened. On that ride back to the White House, I had to fight to keep my mind clear. I thought about what it would be like now to be alone. I thought about what Franklin's death would mean for the country, and indeed for the world. When I arrived at the White House, I was greeted by Mr. Early and Dr. McIntyre. They told me that earlier in the day, the president had suffered a stroke, and that shortly before 3 o'clock, he had passed away. I asked to be left alone for a moment. All those 40 years streamed before my eyes. All the love, the joy, the grief, the betrayal. But it was over now. The story had ended. I then began to make all of the important phone calls. I spoke with Mr. Truman, such a kind, sweet gentleman. He said to me, "Mrs. Roosevelt, what can I do for you?" I replied, "What can I do for you, Mr. Truman? You are the one in trouble now." That evening, I flew down to Warm Springs to the little White House. It was just a cottage Franklin had built there. The light on the porch was always left burning whenever the president was home. I was greeted at the door by Franklin's 2 cousins, Laura and Daisy, and his secretary, Miss Talley. I went into the room where my dearest one lay. I closed the door behind me. And again, all those years flowed before me. But it was over now. It was finished. I came out into the living room of the cottage and I saw a large, unfinished portrait of the president there. I asked Cousin Laura who had commissioned that painting. She was very reluctant to tell me. And then she blurted out that Lucy Mercer had commissioned the painting. Furthermore, she thought it was necessary to tell me that Lucy had been there with the president for the past 2 weeks. She was there as he lay dying. No, I would not let that old demon rise up and take hold of me. It was over. It was finished. The next morning, the president's body was placed aboard the train for the trip to Washington. Thousands had gathered there at the little station at Warm Springs to pay their respects. As the train pulled out of the station, I looked out and I saw a young black soldier, tears streaming down his face. And he sang out in a very clear, loud voice that old hymn, "I'm going home, I'm going home." And I thought, yes, I am taking my dearest one home for the very last time. That night as I lay there aboard the train, I looked out onto the darkened countryside, a countryside Franklin loved so well. People gathered at the trackside to watch the train pass. Many of them held up signs. A man held a sign that read, "Roosevelt was my friend." A young woman held up a sign that read, Roosevelt saved my family. My heart began to soften, and I began to understand how much this country had meant to Franklin and how much Franklin had meant to the country. Franklin had lost the use of his legs, but he taught a crippled country to walk again. After my husband's death, I thought that my years in public service had ended. I thought that I would merely retire to my home at Valkill, New York, and become a doting grandmother. But that was not meant to be. I have traveled the world over. I sat at sunset in the shadow of the Taj Mahal, a scene my father had related to me many times. I have been a witness at the birth of the new nation of Israel. My frequent traveling companion has been my granddaughter, Nina. She reminds me so much of myself when I was so very young, so awkward, so out of place, never able to find some place she can call home, some place where she belongs. President Truman has requested that I act as an ambassador to the newly organized United Nations. I do hope that this august body will realize the hopes and the dreams of my dearest Franklin. In parting, I would like to leave you with a reminder. All of the young men who serve and fight for us are our young men. Their parents may be of a different race or religion, but they are all our young men. Your heart may be tied to just one young man, but it must be with them all. For when one of these young men dies alongside his buddies, he is our young man, so that we might continue to say, we live in the land of the free and the home of the brave. I shall leave you now with a short prayer, one that had sustained me in the long, dark years of the war. Dear Lord, if I become apathetic, if I become complacent, if I become too self-satisfied, let me always be reminded that somewhere out there, a young soldier has died for freedom. A young soldier has died for you. Let us ask and answer, is your freedom worth his dying? Are you worth his dying? Thank you. Thank you very kindly. Thank you so kindly. Thank you very kindly. Thank you so very kindly. Thank you so very kindly. Very briefly, are there any questions that I might answer for you, or have I revealed everything of the Roosevelt family? Oh, was there a question there? No one has. That's very refreshing.
You were born and raised in New York. You went to London for a short time for school. Where did the accent come from?
I don't know. It just happened. It's been there all my life, I suppose. But I have taken lessons in aiding my rather, what should I say, almost birdsong sort of voice. I've also taken lessons from a professional opera singer in order to control my breath, because when I get very excited, my voice seems to go higher and higher and higher until only the neighborhood dogs could possibly pick it up. And I've always become very nervous, even after all these years. I become very nervous when I'm speaking in public, and I'm never very sure of myself, no matter how hard I tell myself everything is fine.
You do a wonderful job.
Thank you. Well, I am going to leave that distinctive voice. It is certainly a distinctive voice. Well, Eleanor, still to this day, and for many of us who weren't even around when she was the first lady and years after, but she is still considered the greatest of all of our first ladies. And she really held a very unique position alongside her husband. What it came down to is they had a family business, and it was called the federal government. And she was certainly very powerful. Many years ago, this was a dear friend of theirs, Harry Hopkins, get his name out there. He had been a very dear friend of Eleanor and then got to know Franklin in New York and went off with them to Washington and held various positions within the administration and as an advisor to the president. And at one point in time, it was shortly before Harry's death, he was being interviewed by a reporter, and the reporter was asking his relationship with the Roosevelts, since he was friends with both Mr. and Mrs. Roosevelt. Was it true, when everybody kept saying all these years that Mrs. Roosevelt had such power in her husband's administration? Was that true? And Harry responded, yes, it was very true. And he remarked that you have never seen real power until you see Eleanor look into Franklin's eyes and say, you will do this. She had power. They did have 6 children, 5 to survive to adulthood. They would eventually have 14 grandchildren. Many of those grandchildren would be cycled through Eleanor's house at Valkill. There's a wonderful photograph of Eleanor standing. There's kind of like a picnic pavilion at the back of her house. And she has all 14 grandchildren around the table, and Eleanor is at the head of the table throwing dinner rolls to the kids. So she was not very close with her children, and that part of that was because of her mother-in-law. Her mother-in-law was actually in charge of all of that. But Eleanor was very close to her grandchildren, and also her niece, Eleanor. Her niece was Eleanor Roosevelt. Eleanor Roosevelt Seagrave, and that was Eleanor's brother, Hall. That was his daughter. And Eleanor was always very close with her and really loved her much as a daughter, and was kind of distant from her own children. Well, thank you again for coming to meet Eleanor. Thank you.